Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next segment of our course on career paths for nurses and nurse practitioners. I'd like to welcome Jennifer Clement to our discussion today. Jennifer is, and actually, perhaps it's even easier if you explain what your current role is, Jen.
Okay. I'm a primary care nurse practitioner, and then since 2012, I've been the executive director of the Sudbury District Nurse Practitioner Clinics.
And that's, I think, exactly the kinds of thing that our listeners are going to want to know more about. So can you tell us a little bit about your transition into the role of the executive director?
Okay. It's an interesting one. Actually, when I first started, the way the nurse practitioner clinics are set up is that the NP lead wore dual hats as half NP, half executive director or clinic lead. And then with nurse practitioner-led clinics, the expectation from the Ministry of Health is that each nurse practitioner carries a patient load of 800 patients. And in the case of the NP lead, that was the expectation was you'd have half that patient load, and then a couple days a week you would see patients, and then a couple days a week you would be the executive director. However, in my case, because our clinic grew, we have 3 sites, we have 25 full-time staff. That dual role just became too much. And then about 2.5 years ago, our board agreed that I would be strictly administrative role, and then just fill in as nurse practitioner as the clinic needed it, just because it became a bit too much.
I'm sure it did. That sounds really daunting. What was your experience when you first became the executive director? What was your experience with the admin piece?
It was different because I didn't have any experience being a manager. I didn't have any experience with HR, leadership. There's different leadership styles. I knew none of them. So it was a crash course in talking to other people who had been executive directors. And then I did a lot of, I did my health leadership course through Ontario Hospital Association, which I'm not sure if they have it anymore. But that way, then I got to learn more about, okay, how to be a leader, how to look at a budget, what is HR, what's privacy, because as the executive director, I became the privacy officer of the clinic as well. So you hear about PHIPAA in school, but you don't realize the full extent of the PHIPAA and how it, healthcare agency, but we're responsible anyway for all the privacy issues, thanks to PHIPAA. So I had to learn about that. So it's been a big learning curve. I'm still learning. I'm still taking courses because there's so much to know. So it's been interesting.
No, there certainly is, because it's certainly a body of knowledge that you wouldn't necessarily get as a clinical nurse practitioner. So if you were to do this again or start over, if you were moving into this role, what would you suggest to somebody who has just been working as a nurse practitioner up until now, or a nurse?
I would say start taking classes. If you have some interest in doing an executive role or a leadership role, start taking some classes on the side. Just kind of that way, then you can kind of get your feet wet before you become a leader. Because it's not only are you learning about the new organization, you're learning about leadership, you're learning about HR, then you're already kind of in there doing that. Like you've got your vacation requests, you have your everything that goes into a leadership role. You're still learning it, but yet you're still working at it, because the organization doesn't stop just because you're just learning how to run it.
I mean, it makes perfect sense. I'm just wondering, were there any specific challenges or anything in particular issues that you found over the years that would be of interest to some of our listeners?
One of the biggest challenges, especially if you're still seeing patients, is you have the role, you're still a peer, but yet you're the manager or the boss. So that was a very difficult one to transition to. Because you're still going to them with your colleagues with questions, but yet sometimes if there's an HR issue that has to be resolved, sometimes you're having to do performance evaluation. So that can be a bit tricky. That I found difficult.
Was it difficult, or were there any challenges in your relationship with the other staff when you transitioned to the admin role?
Um, not that I remember. Um, my case was a little bit different too, because I was asked to do an interim basis. So I thought I had every intention of just doing it for the year and then kind of going back to my regular role. But I really enjoyed it. It was a new challenge. I really enjoyed the advocacy. I really enjoyed, meeting with the community members and working on projects. I really, really enjoyed that. So I ended up staying in that role. So it was a bit of a different transition. And then I was also fortunate too that I had the previous executive directors that had worked here, and then really good support from our board that I was able to go to them if I had any questions as well. So that really helped also.
And it sounds like some of the leadership courses that you took, or some of the courses that you took them with an eye to not only manage the clinic's day-to-day operations and budget, but also to maintain those kinds of good relationships with the staff and that sort of thing. Putting words into your mouth.
It was because it's and that was one of the questions I had when I went to do one of the leadership classes. And the gentleman laughed at me and said, "Oh, you're in a tricky spot." And I said, "I know." So I said, "That's why I need to learn, because I'm doing both roles still."
I think your experience is really common amongst nursing and nurses and nurse practitioners, is that we tend to transition to admin or leadership roles within an area that we've practiced. And so those kinds of advice is really helpful, I think. You talked about the board of directors, and it doesn't matter where people work, they will often be reporting to or have to have a relationship with a board of governors, board of directors. And I'm wondering if you can comment a little bit on that with respect to your role as the executive director.
I was fortunate because I actually sat on a community board before I became executive director. So I got to learn about how a board functions and what the role of a board is before even becoming into my role. So if that's one thing I would suggest, because they're always looking for professionals to sit on boards in the community. So get some experience that way as well. And then that way, then it helped me transition. So I knew exactly, okay, what should I be reporting to the board? When do I go to the board if I had any questions, if there was anything that I needed to kind of give them an update on before events happened. So that helped my transition actually, because I had some board experience, and then I had done some governance training as well. And there always are classes available in the communities, and take advantage of them, because they're subject matter experts. So they'll give you a really good introduction to governance.
And it really helps to support not only the executive director, but everybody, all the staff in the organization.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you also talked about some other things that you enjoyed doing that fall within your role, things like program development and evaluation and working with stakeholders in the community. Is there anything that you would suggest that when somebody's looking to an administrative type of role that would include those things? Is there anything that you would suggest with respect to those types of roles that might support them?
One of the things I'm personally even looking at is program management, or program, how to develop programs properly, how to follow through on the programs. Just because, especially we've seen with COVID, like the communities really come together to support big projects. So learning how to be a stakeholder in those projects, and learning how, to properly make sure that you're meeting X, Y, Z, to make sure that you're supporting the rest of the projects. I actually learned that from somebody that I sat on a committee with. And I thought, okay, would really help in my role as well.
It's interesting because many of the programs for leadership in health administration require people to have had some experience in health administration before they take them. And it seems a little counterproductive when there are definitely skills that are needed that fall outside of clinical practice, and yet people tend to transition right from a clinical practice position into those. So, but it's really encouraging to see that you've been able to find those resources, and you've been able to use that kind of information to really expand your role and promote
And
optimism.
I've been really fortunate too, is with nurse practitioner led clinics, we meet on a regular basis, and we've actually formed a group. We meet once a month to talk about, okay, what are some leadership challenges we're having? What are some, so it's finding people that are already in that role as well to learn from them. That's been my best learning experience as well, besides the courses I've taken.
Like a mentorship
Exactly.
type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's really interesting as well. So so it sounds like the professional organizations or administrative organizations themselves might play a role in supporting people in these types of positions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we were laughing because, you know, we learned a ton when we were in the NP program, but that's the one thing we don't touch on is how to be a leader. And yeah, so
how to run a business.
how to run a business. Exactly. Like I used to look at a budget and think, oh my gosh, I can't even budget my own household. And you're giving me all this money. But that's when it's really important when you're in a leadership role like this as well, is to have somebody that's really, that you trust implicitly as a business manager in that role too.
So it's not only your position, but the people who support your position that need to be really good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
all right. Is there any other information or advice that you might give somebody who's interested in a role like this?
I would say talk to leaders in your community. If you have anybody that's already in a role like this, talk to them. See what support they can offer. See if they'd even be willing to let you shadow them for a bit to see if maybe this isn't for you. Maybe it is. And start taking some courses on the side, as you know, one or two classes here and there, just so that when you do become a leader or have a leadership role, then you know you have a little bit of that knowledge behind you.
Okay, this is wonderful. Thank you very much for this little discussion.
No problem.